For the past day and a bit, we've been really exploring the theme around wilderness. What does it mean to be wild? Looking at a lot of the work of a lot of thinkers, artists, panels, conversations. And what just elapsed is a really beautiful block about what does it mean to become with versus to become animal. And it's basically a lot of rethinking the logic behind human history and reframing it and really going into the future and understanding how do we reclaim imagination with that lens of wildness. But I think now we get to even ground it more, and then I'm really excited of like art as environmental practice of doing so, and really how do we build long-term relationships and long-term field work to understand how do we relate to biological systems. So the artists in this session particularly, they conduct research, design installations to reveal that environmental harm on one level, and on another level envision symbiotic relationships between us, landscapes, and animals. So this was like almost a tension last time of like, all right, we're speculating, we're reframing the past, but what can we do now? What is a tactic that we can employ to really respond to the themes that have been occurring in the festival so far? So we have two wonderful speakers. One is Matteo Marangoni, who is who is presenting a project on coursing symbionts, and then another talk really by Xandra van der Eijk, who is really gonna walk us through some of her work. So without further ado, I'd like to invite you on stage, so a very big round of applause for Xandra.
Hi everyone, it's difficult to see you. Can you hear me well? Okay, perfect. So my name is Xandra van der Eijk. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the organization for having me. It's really lovely to be back. Today I will shortly introduce you to my way of working, especially concerning embodied knowledge and creating environmental literacy through artistic engagement with the field. I'm an artist and researcher, and I'm primarily interested in studying human-made infrastructures that have, as anthropologist Anat Singh describes, feral effects which emerge within human-sponsored projects but that are not necessarily in human control. And I'm fascinated by how this ferality knows no boundaries and messes up notions of time and predictability. Singh states that we now live in capitalist ruins and that it is needed to advance from 20th century scholarship that, quote, conspired against our ability to notice the divergent, layered, and conjoined projects that make up worlds. As an artistic researcher, I practice theory in the field. I do not stand outside of the world that I'm researching, I am of the world. That means that it is foundational to understand how knowledge is being created, including its gaps and shortcomings that provide opportunity for artistic research. I believe the concept of the feral is particularly true, occurring in watery bodies, which is maybe why my research interest is often drawn to seas, rivers, estuaries, and glaciers. I engage with their actors and through them uncover the complex ecologies with which they are entangled, and I'm fascinated by the permeable, fluid boundaries between their materialities. It's a fascination that manifests in the intimate encounters I have in the field, in my studio, and in my garden with matter itself. In these moments, I wonder, when relations are materially done, and if these relations are essential to different kinds of world-making and knowledge production, and materials are what story the field, can we devise new and powerful ways to know the field by doing? So a core question I try to answer through my artistic practice is how to track, translate, and understand what exists outside of human-centric systems. My neurocomplexity offers me a natural curiosity for understanding another's nature because mine seems at times so different from most, and it is part of my life to spend time on this question in order to function. In the field that translates as an ability to radically accept the field as is. The local actors' relations, reasons for emergence, assemblages, and politics may be a testament to broader inequality, pressures, and tensions. Through the artistic engagement with place, these present themselves, often in unexpected ways. So I will first take you back to the very start of my practice as it is today, to a project I did in 2015, so a long time ago. I will share with you a profound experience and realization I had later in 2019, what I learned from that in regard to doing field work, and then some artistic work I'm currently doing. So my first artistic engagement with the materiality of place was in light of a sustainability project. Together with a textile designer, I was exploring how seaweeds may offer an alternative dye method for fabric which promised to offer great advantages over chemical dyes. To experiment, I needed seaweed, and most seaweed in the Netherlands grows here in the Eastern Scheldt, a part of the famous delta works that have created a controlled tide and a very peculiar temporary ecosystem. I made an elaborate experimentation scheme with loads of variables for species, fiber pre-treatment, and processing techniques. I won't go too deep into it. And this eventually led to a big wall filled with over 300 samples showing the research results at Dutch Design Week, where it was picked up and went its own way. But what I found most remarkable about the research process was how my impressions of the mudflats, where I collected the seaweed for experimentation, were manifested and represented in the range of colors that I was able to produce with them. Just as an impression, the last one was a tide pool, and here we're harvesting from the dike at low tide. And then this is a selection of larger dyed silk cloths. It may sound obvious now that the colors reflected the environment, but it wasn't, at least not to me. Up until then, I'd never considered that that would happen so obviously. And as so often happens in the artistic research process, the textile dye experiments delivered another result, which uncovered a surprising effect as a result of a natural process. By placing the algae in brackish water, the fermentation process revealed a bright pink and red colors. The cycle of experimentation started again, now directed at finding out when this process happened, how, what its properties were. And here are some of the experiments showing different hues and intensities and even fluorescence. And so I developed my first installation following this concept based on my findings and used that knowledge to tell a story. This work is called Estuary and demonstrates the life and death cycle of algae and bacteria in a closed system as a reenactment of the ecosystem of the Eastern Scheldt. This was the first time that I understood how an artistic process could be used to enable site-specific matter to voice itself, and how making art with it gave me the opportunity to present their story. My work since then has been focused on developing methods for letting the field speak back. I've explored many different material experimentation techniques, either adapted existing protocols and technologies as well as completely inventing them on the go. I 3D scanned glaciers, rock formations, and underwater reefs. I've cultivated bacteria, extracted pigments, made pigments, inks, dyes, and prints. Recorded sounds, made my own devices, had custom devices built, and listened intently to existing recordings for days. And I experimented with chemical reactions, growing minerals and crystallization patterns, and so much more. The responses I received from matter directed the stories that I wished to tell and what art I produced, always centralizing the main lesson I learned from the materiality of place and its actors and assemblages. Though I started from my own country and my own backyard, it was not through an embodied connection. I was also increasingly invited abroad. At the time, I thought that was wonderful, and it was. It helped shape my thinking and sometimes shifted my perspective. However, for me, something went out of alignment along the way. There was a growing unease. Because how do you relate to a place that you're only just visiting, for a few weeks or a few days even? In 2019, I was doing research in Chile as part of the residency program Valley of the Possible in northern Patagonia. I got to work following my usual approach, but the wickedness of environmental issues and their unmistakable entanglement with social justice and political ideology was way too much for me to process in such a short amount of time. With an ever-growing focus on water bodies and water-related ecologies, I was interested in a mighty river called the Biobío. It's a now classic environmental justice story, still unresolved, that I'm not going to fully unpack here. But it is important to share from my personal experience because my time there changed my view on doing field work. It made me understand that I was doing research about the BOBO, not with, by, or through. The local community, First Nation Mapuche people, explained to me that their ancestral river was sick, with 7 megadams installed on the river, whose construction flooded cemeteries, and the cold forests were replaced with monoculture eucalyptus. I would take samples from their lands, their waters, their ancestors, their spirit, and so much land and water and spirit had been taken from them already. It did not sit right with me to develop art from what I experienced and witnessed, basically furthering my own career without sharing their lived experience. Their people's suffering had started with the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century and was still ongoing. I deeply felt that developing work from this field trip would perpetuate the extractivism that I could now name. It was not my story to tell. It took me years to process my experience because it filled me with a deep sense of grief. Maybe only now, 6 years later, dust has begun to settle down. It's driven me to question continuously what extractivism is, not only on an industrial and ecosystemic level, but also how it shows up in my life and decision-making. How to continue engaging with the field in a way that does not perpetuate harm. In the aftermath, my focus was incorporating it all in a master's program called Ecology Futures, still exists, and we've built community through fiber labs to pay it forward, amongst other things. But on a personal level, I felt completely stuck for ages. I followed advice from Mapuche philosopher Milton Almonacid to investigate my own relations and my own environment. I was born in Zevenaar, which is on the Dutch-German border, where the Rhine enters the country. And my life has centered around this river, and yet I never paid it much attention. I felt no connection. September last year, I met Maori elder Irena Rose, and I presented her with my problem of disconnection and my inability to move forward after Chile. She said, "Koa ta'awa, ko ta'ao koao. I am the river is me." But it did nothing for me, it did not resonate. She said, "Spend time with the river, be in their presence. The relationship will grow." And so started my current long-term research project, Hydroformations, that dives into finding ways for the Rhine to voice itself. And through the process, I'm hoping to rediscover my roots and rebuild my relationship with the river. And so I started visiting the river. On some walks along the riverbanks, I found big mussel shells. Initially, I thought nothing of it, discarded probably by boating people having a good time. But they kept showing up, in little groups, often shattered. At one point, I saw a bird with one, and I knew these shells were evidence of the riverine ecosystem. The birds would dive deep and, if lucky, find a mussel they could carry, fly up and drop the mussel, ideally on pavement or a stone dike, where the mussel shell would break open, their weak parts exposed to serve as a meal. And I started collecting the shells, studying them attentively. Their ears marked in ribs, their pearlescent skin, their cellulose-covered backing, the weeds attached to them. And I saw tiny, tiny pearls. Pearls are formed when an intruder enters the mussel. Can be anything, a grain of sand, an insect or a parasite, plastic. The mussel responds with care. They cover the intruder with a layer of nacre, and another one, and another one. As long as they live, which can be as long as 200 years. Their pearls are a testament of life events, intruders forever conserved in the middle. I was in awe of these mussels and their caring response to a million small acts of violence. And I saw my own life reflected in theirs. Submerged in a river dominated by industry and control, having no choice but to let the polluted waters move through their body and deal with the consequences. They taught me how to respond in softness, not weakness, in gentle resistance, in acceptance. I felt the desire to pay homage to them in gratitude for these lessons. So, using alginate, a very soft modeling substance derived from algae, I reproduced their shells in gypsum with every intricate detail preserved. Their gypsum doubles were covered in glass and heated, crafting a shell for a shell. Every single glass shell I next modeled by hand to fit them precisely, my hands learning their curves and unique features in the process. I smithered a rack to fit on the back, now fluent in following their arches, and set the shells in their new shells with the utmost care and precision. I added a very simple LED light to highlight their pearls, their suffering, and their labor. And in doing so, I pulled the attention back to them, making my own labor invisible, like theirs. In the first edition of the work, I found that even though the tribute worked very well when they hung together in a dark space, the need to create an environment that would be perceived not only as peaceful but also haunted. I wish to emphasize the pressure the mussels are under during their lives. So, together with my partner Sasha, I chose to work with the recordings of underwater sound of the river, isolating the industrial sounds to compose a soundscape for the installation. Like the mussels that are forced to share their bodies with the many industrial influences traversing their space during their lives, the spectators of the installation now become subjected to the echoes of their suffering. The materiality of place fully informed the creation of the work, however in a more autobiographical way, embodying a becoming with each other. So field recording in the river leads to pretty much a predictable result, since there's so much shipping traffic. Though nature documentaries like to present the Dutch delta like this area here, which is the verdronken land van Saftingen in Zeeland, kind of like a pristine wilderness, if you will, which doesn't exist, as we all know. It primarily looks like this. This is the Amsterdam Rhine channel. The river is reduced to a highway where we talk about water retention or discharge, about the flow rate per minute, or how many ships can pass, max length and depth, and how fast they can cross the many locks. And the Amsterdam Rhine channel is dug straight next to the Vecht, a part of the Rhine that starts near my home, flows past my allotment garden, and empties in the IJmeer. The Vecht is celebrated for its natural character, like the drowned land of Sefting is celebrated as an untouched part of the delta. It remains a status symbol even today, which it originally became when the rich VOC merchants from Amsterdam built their summer country houses here. However, its curves and depth changes were a problem to the shipping industry, and so the Amsterdam Rhine channel was constructed. And here you can see the Vecht meandering its somewhat original course along the straight line of the channel. Besides facilitating transport, the channel does something else. It effectively separates and hides industry from the picturesque, romanticized idea of Dutch waterways. Almost every day I go to the sluices near my home, where the Vecht starts. It's also the location of the now famous fish doorbell. I don't know if you've heard of it. Fish lay waiting for the sluice to open to continue their migration, and the public can watch the live cam and ring the bell if they see fishes waiting. But when I spoke with the city ecologist, they knew barely anything about the migrating species living in the city waters. So I wondered, might we become aware of their presence otherwise? I found out that records exist of ancient descriptions of loud humming or intense thunder-like sounds along the riverbanks, inspiring local ghost stories or signifying the herald of spring, as the fish call out to mate in big numbers. I listened to the sound of the North American boatsman fish, and I was absolutely blown away. And so, inspired by the fish waiting every day by the sluices, I went looking for similar stories in the Netherlands. I learned of the sound of perches, pikes, and the sound of the long-thought-extinct lota lota, whose hidden existence was quite recently rediscovered through field recording. It sounds like this. So it's no surprise to me that fish produce sound in the sense that sound is a sign of life, biological or otherwise. However, what I didn't understand is why whale song inspired an entire movement while fish songs remain unheard. I mean, I think it's pretty fantastic. In search of recordings, I found kinship with two Dutch scientists at Leiden University. They told me that, shamefully, fish acoustics have long been dismissed in Western scientific research. There's very little knowledge on what fish produce sound and what sounds belong to each species. I managed to collect the rare recordings of fishes in Dutch waters by the few people who concern themselves with this topic. I thought of the samples I collected as a storytelling force, and together with composer Harpo Hart speculated scenarios where fish were producing sounds for different reasons. Might the fish's grunts and hisses signify distress, a warning not to invade their territory, or a possibly in vain call for a partner? In addition to the sound recordings, I looked into the fish's habitats and the general characteristics of the Rhine underwaterscape. I quickly learned that equally the riverine ecology is mostly overlooked. The only impression I was able to access was through the short GoPro recordings by leisure divers. I realized that they unintentionally formed the only archival collection of this ecology, offering an important time capsule of today's state of the river. Together with my team, I worked to create 3D models from these videos. We translated them into moving images that give a glimpse of the peat banks, floodplains, and adopted overgrown trash that ends up on the river floor. The generally poor visibility is translated in the distortions and gaps in the animations, inviting you to consider the importance of other senses and to represent the lack of awareness. The sound and images came together in this trial installation at Zone to Source. I created a circle with river stones, source of one of the main industries along the Rhine, with screens as glimpses underwater, and the 8-channel sound composition designed to move through and play with a sense of space. Its working title is Fish's Lament. So through this ongoing artistic fieldwork and constant exchange between fieldwork, archival, academic research, and material experimentation, I'm starting to build and restore my personal connection with the Rhine. The Rhine is one of Europe's biggest and most important rivers, and most of it flows beyond, or before if you will, Dutch territory. And so recently I followed the Rhine upstream, and it became a full circle trip. Why? Because the story of the Biobío, where I left a piece of my heart and whose grief has filled me for years, is the story of the Rhine. And then I realized that the grief that I felt in Chile was my own grief, and the sickness that I felt in the Biobío is the sickness of my river, the Rhine, that flows through me and my family history. Both are stories of the death of a river, its inhabitants, its culture and rituals, its harmonious space of cohabitation and exchange. Places and their materialities resonate. Their stories are our stories, and their suffering or flourishing is our own. And perhaps moving through all that grief, that confrontation with systemic oppression and exploitation, it is possible to start remembering and finally creating space for a reimagination of the river in a form of the river's choosing. Through artistic engagement with the field, I can share unsung stories, remember us of forgotten baselines so we may collectively set new standards and start working collaboratively with the river towards a form of repair. Through my work, I hope to in some way emphasize the agency of my river, who flows with all rivers, who sustain us in reciprocity. So I'm currently working on an online environment where I share documentation of my journey, which is ongoing, launching in July. And I'm hoping to expand my personal Rhine guardianship into a guardian community, developing new tools for becoming together. For that, I'm planning a lab early August. I don't have any images with that yet, but please don't hesitate if you feel called and wish to join. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. And I have to say I was a little bit intentional about not introducing you too much before your talk, because I think your work embodies so much of your journey.
Thank you.
Because I think we see the art, we see the kind of educational elements and the personal embodiment of the work. You said the river flows through me. Yeah. And I think maybe one quick question, I know we're a little bit short on time. How do you invite, just connecting back to the theme of the evening, right? Wildness. How do you, of course you're dealing with wild elements when we look at the mussel shells in the river, but how do you introduce it to your practice as a methodology?
The sense of wildness, you mean?
Yeah.
I think it's very much in the sphere of forality, where I'm really interested in, especially here in the West and especially in Dutch water management, is designed around control, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what we're seeing now is that there's so many wild elements to that river, talking about Fas and Foa, for instance, you know, and that's kind of how I see it. And also, you can also see in the ecosystem changes, and in some, it's interesting to me where that boundary lies when it's becoming a sacrifice zone, where it's really, you know, sacrifice for industry, for financial reasons, for you know, habitation, whatever, or when there's a reciprocal environment where both can flourish at the same time. And there are also sections of the river that, you know, still inhabit that. They're very hard to find, but they are still there.
Where industry and wildness can coexist.
Well, I'm not sure if it's industry, but where there's, you know,
cohabitation that is not industrial. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I was really intrigued
where people are also like really investing in kind of restoring the old stream of the river and trying, rewilding programs, but also letting, the environment basically not having a practice of not doing too much.
Yeah.
And to like see that as an exchange. So I think it shows up in many different ways.
Okay, I would love to ask you more about this, but then maybe there's a question from the audience. And it will have more time to ask, but maybe it's a small provocation or really something that stood out. There's a question here on the right. I can barely see. Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to say I think your work is super interesting, and I love how ethnographic and super holistic it is. I just wanted to hear from you what medium has been the most reflective of the entire process, or has been able to reach people.
Great question.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I can't answer it because I think the part of the process, I always have such difficulty applying for funding and stuff like that, because they always ask you, what are you going to do? And this part of my practice is quite radical, where I don't decide on anything. I really, I do like pre-research, maybe like seeing what information I can find, like general desk research. But then, to select the places where I can go. But then it's really a matter of going outside and then to let that speak back to me. And whatever I get, what stands out to me in the moment, so it's very much an interaction. It's not just, sometimes there's an abundance of something, or sometimes it's very, very small and it speaks in color or, texture or smell or whatever. And I ask permission to take that, and I start this experimentation process, and it's always like completely unknown to me what will happen. And sometimes nothing happens, it doesn't speak back, so that also happens. But I have my fascinations with seaweeds and like microbes and crystals, definitely. Like there's like this basic interest from the start, but I hope that answers your question a little bit, yeah.
I think it's really wonderful how, I think your work fits really, I think part of it is also like assemblages of the work that you've done, but it fits so beautifully in a narrative that is so question-driven, that it's like, oh, I asked this question and it led me to this place, and then another question happened, and I was like, how do I tell these stories? Yeah. And it fits so nicely, and I think part of that could be the decentering of methodology as a departure point.
No, for sure, yeah.
Where it's not like color is what I'm doing, and I'll just do that. Yeah. Okay, beautiful. So I think we're going to talk more about this. Yeah. But a big round of applause for Xandra. Thank you so much for taking us on this journey of your work. And I think to augment this, enrich it, we have Matteo Marangoni, who's an artist, community organizer, interested in sonic rituals, DIY media, and applied utopianism. His artistic practice focuses on creating spatial experiences, probing the relationship between subject and object. And if you were with us yesterday, this is one of the things that we've killed very early on, the distinction or the delineation of subject and object. So a big round of applause for Matteo.
Thank you so much for having me and for already the inspiring talks that preceded. I will tell you a little bit about the work I'm doing at the moment. The project is called, as you see on screen, Chorusing Symbionts and What Led to It. Chorusing suggests a collective sound making, which can be vocal human music, or what we hear if there were earlier talks about birding, the dawn chorus, different species vocalizing in the morning, and symbionts as the idea of life as interdependent network. But this interdependent network in my work hasn't only to do with the life forms that evolved biologically on our planet, but also with artificial life forms. So I would like to start introducing a series of projects I've worked on. It also has its own will. Yes. So these, just like my microphone, we can see here some microphones that were moving around, and in this case, intentionally. I was a student, actually in the same year as Xandra at the Art Science Interfaculty in The Hague, and I came across the work of Felix Hess, who was a Dutch sound artist and previously also a scientist, and he fell in love with the sounds made by frogs, which I would expect to be hearing at this moment. And he started first recording the vocalizations of frogs when he was working as a researcher in Australia. And when he moved back to the Netherlands, he was missing them so much that he tried to recreate them artificially by assembling these electronic beings, modeling the behavior, the chorusing behavior of the frogs, maybe to understand them or maybe to purely enjoy them. So here you can see the diagram of the electronic circuit of the sound creatures of Felix Hess. What I love about it, it looks like a schematic of how this circuit is operating, but it also has these other ideas attached to it, which maybe are more emotional, like eagerness and shyness. And so I was captivated by the idea of this electronic life form. And it was a work that, for me, was only accessible through a documentation, text, and very few images. But I couldn't, there was no recording, or there was no way that I could experience it. So together with my colleague Dieter van Doren, we decided to make our own version. And we created with Lampiride a swarm of 70 little electronic circuits, which are a sort of digital interpretation of the work of Felix Hess, so sort of one step further removed from the animal kingdom, if you like. Here there's a microphone detecting the sounds in the environment, processing those in real time, and then emitting a response through this little speaker horn. And something that was fascinating me at the time was, could be a little bit louder, the idea of swarm intelligence. Today we are hearing a lot about artificial intelligence. Swarm intelligence is one of the older branches that is not as fashionable as, say, generative AI at this moment, but which was looking at some questions that I still find very relevant. In this case, we have a number of autonomous agents. Each of them are starting from the same conditions and then responding to each other, and from their individual responses, we get this complex behavior. And swarm intelligence is also part of complexity theory, part of the idea of artificial life, trying to understand how does complexity emerge, and perhaps even what is the origin of life? How did life spontaneously emerge from non-life? And can we, let's say, simulate that or experience that in this musical form? So what I was very satisfied with in this work is this complex and organic sound field that immerses the listener when you're cohabiting a space with these little creatures. But together with Dieter, we had the ambition of also, because we're thinking also about this as music, how can this music develop over time and go to different places? And actually, that's something that is very difficult to do when working purely on the level of a decentralized system, without a conductor, without a central a command control system. So we were invited in 2020 to do a new project at Into the Great Wide Open, which is a music festival on the island of Vlieland in the Waddenzee here in the Netherlands. And that triggered us to think about, okay, we made this swarm, which is inspired by animals and animal communication, and we are now invited to bring it outdoors. What's going to happen there? And can we then think about the circadian rhythm, which is a kind of metronome that synchronizes life on Earth, also as the conductor for the music that we are going to make. So we started on the project, which then became komorebi. Komorebi is a Japanese word which means sunlight shining through the trees, and it's a beautiful image. At this point, we were in the pandemic, and going out and taking walks in the park was an important moment for me to sort of escape the lockdown. And I started greatly enjoying spending time looking at the shadow play on the forest floor, for example. I live in The Hague, in the Haagse but also just outside of my studio, where there's a few trees in the Willem Drees Park. And looking at this shadow play, I started realizing something relatively simple and ordinary is actually the result of this much bigger picture. There's the patterns in growth and vegetation. There's the climate. There's wind blowing through the trees, moving these shadows. There are clouds of different thicknesses and dimensions passing in front of the sun, and then there's the movement of the sun itself. And in a sort of contemplation that made me recall that sublime Taoist thought that Troy was talking about earlier, I was thinking about how this image is a representation of life, of something that goes beyond the idea of a biological organism. And I was thinking, how can then we translate this image and this idea into a musical form? So, well, as somebody who works with electronic and digital technology, I, together with Dieter, started working on a prototype with this little breadboard and a few electronic components and some lines of code. And because by this time the festival had been postponed and we're searching for alternative ways to also engage with audience, we made a DIY electronics kit, which we called Komorebi Larva. And it was boxed and mailed. People could assemble it without any previous knowledge, simple instructions, and then put it on their windowsill or balcony, or bring it in the park to then be able to listen to the concert made by moving plants. And this is what the Komorebi larva sounds like. What you are listening to here is the effect of a tree which is out of frame, which is casting the shadow, and the shadow is being picked up by a very simple little light sensor, and the data from the light sensor is fed into a digital synthesizer, which is looking at the differentials, so how the light is changing over time, which is an indication of the wind. And this data is then driving a synthesizer which is modeled after an Aeolian harp, which is a traditional instrument which is also played by the wind. So also looking at what traditional forms there are in human music which are trying to embrace a non-human agency. This project, we called it Komorebi Larva because it was the beginning of something, of a new life, but also because it didn't yet have its adult body. We then started working on that. So I'm often using the horn because it's this beautiful shape visually, but also it's a very efficient way to amplify and project sound with limited energy. So then we started designing this horn and looking for ways to produce it, and then we settled on a cast rather than a 3D print as in the previous work, because we were trying to find a visual representation of this relationship with the light of the sun and the environment, and this transparency of the material allowed us to both capture both the glow of the sunlight and also the surrounding vegetation. We saw, though, that there's a sort of danger. They're very fragile, and that people might step on them while they're in a park. So then we gave them this red coloring as a sort of warning sign. Don't step here. And then this is quite an elaborate design, and then we had to make 100 of them. So there was a little, sort of also very material process for some months of painting, sanding, assembling, soldering, until we had our creatures, and we could finally bring them to Vlieland. And they've been traveling through different parks and gardens last couple of years. The moment we were working in Vlieland, it was incredible until the festival started. And then suddenly, on this relatively small island, where normally I think there's just a few hundred people living, there was 7,000 people. And hundreds of thousands of watts of music and lights going on from quite early in the morning to very late at night. And I found myself escaping to the furthest spot on the island where I could just listen to the seagulls and not hear the techno beats. So it was already, let's say, a moment where I was realizing, okay, yes, I love to share this place with other people and have this musical experience, but there's a difference between, say, the main stage here of this, let's say, pop music format and the experience that we were offering with 101 watt speakers over, I think, about a hectare of dunes. The little speakers that we're using, let's say, they are audible within maybe 5-10 meters rather than for some kilometers. And the other question that we started thinking about is, okay, so now our creatures are outdoors, and they are sharing space with wild animals. In this case, mostly in the Netherlands, a lot of birds. And so how could we think about the relationship between our creatures and the animals that they are cohabiting with? That brought me to discover a field that I didn't know that much about, which is a field that's developing very quickly, of artificial intelligence applied to bioacoustics and more broadly nature conservations. This is a book by Karen Baker. She's actually Canadian, despite the Dutch heritage. The Sounds of Life. And here there's a very comprehensive summary of different things that are happening in this domain, from tracking biodiversity, species recognition, what you can do with your phone if you download BirdNet or Merlin, for example, and monitoring the, let's say, health of the biosphere. Some experiments with also adding sound to damaged environments in order to encourage repopulation as acoustic lures, and also, more controversially, different forms of interspecies communication. Especially in this point, what I find fascinating is more on the philosophical level. The data that's coming in and it's being analyzed using, say, large language models to, let's say, question the historical idea of human exceptionalism regarding language, and so with the amount of data available, having some more arguments to show how actually animal cultures and animal life is comparable to human culture and human communication on the level of complexity, that we are not alone and we are not above other species in this. My question is somehow peripheral to all of that, but related, and I'm asking, from my experience with Komorebi in parks and gardens, is it possible to create interspecies music in which robots and animal play together? And what would that mean? Of course, when working with wild animals, there's a lot of ethical questions. The animals can't give us their feedback in a way that we understand objectively. And I came across this theory, which is called the acoustic niche hypothesis, which proposes that animals evolved vocalization behaviors that enable them to share acoustic space while minimizing conflict. So what we see here are spectrograms where researchers have isolated with the color coding different vocalizations that happen, partitioning in the space in different frequencies and in different times. So vocalization can be in a lower register or in a higher register, as for example, vocal composition in human music, but also during in time, both in the micro scale of, say, rhythm, but also on a larger scale. For example, different times of day. Here we see swifts being very active. This is detections I was making in the garden of Mares in Maastricht. Swifts vocalizing. They're called screaming parties, very late in the evening, and the doves vocalizing early in the morning. So looking at this theory of acoustic niche and conflict avoidance, I started thinking, what if my artificial creatures could also become aware of the vocalizations of animals in their surroundings, and therefore evolve and search for their own niche and evolve acoustic behaviors that are inspired by how vocalization behaviors evolved naturally. So this is an idea of integration into the biosphere of this kind of music by introducing silences and pauses which are allowing other creatures to be undisturbed, but also which is at the same time guiding the attention of the listener towards this world. Apart from the sonic level, another aspect that is important for me is that of the energetic integration. So I'm looking at how can these artificial creatures sustain themselves through the energy of the sun. Previously, I was not doing this, partly due to the limitations of traditional crystalline photovoltaics. As you have noticed, the work I'm also in the shape. I'm trying to work with organic forms, but then I encountered what is an emerging and alternative photovoltaic material, which is thin film solar foil. So I'm asking, would it be possible to encapsulate in the body of the creature this material so that the skin of the creature is then doing a sort of artificial photosynthesis. Here you can see an early experiment where we took a piece of existing solar foil and encased it in the same material that was used for the bodies of Komorebi. So what is a lifelike design? These are some of images that we took as inspiration for the next creature that I'm working on, which is the cicada. And here you can see a bit of the work in progress from the 3D model to this is a half-scale print, and the pattern for the wings, which we are planning to encapsulate in the wing, which will then be generating the electricity. Thinking about artificial intelligence should be constrained both physically in terms of space, but also energetically in terms of there's a limited amount of energy, and what can we do? Biological intelligence has evolved with these constraints, and artificial intelligence might also benefit from having similar constraints. Finally, this is the design concept for chorusing symbionts, which will be an installation that will be presented in parks, where these artificial creatures will respond to each other and will respond to the weather, but which will also try to establish these relationships with wild animals and nourish themselves from the light of the sun. I'd like to end with some words about intelligence by a few people who are much smarter than myself. To build a system that is intelligent, it is necessary to have its representation grounded in the physical world. The key observation is that the world is its own best model. This was Rodney Brooks in 1990. Unless we align the infosphere with the biosphere, we are in for another crisis. This is Alice Eldridge in 2020. And what would it mean, indeed, for a computer to speak more like a bird, more like the wind or water than like a stone? Machine will need to go out into the world and spend time with it. And this is James Bridle in 2022. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Matteo. I'm going to invite you to the couch and invite Xandra up also. We're going to have a little conversation. And I'm going to pour some water for us because I'm also feeling a little bit. I think I'm already going to start kind of fabricating a connection a little bit between both talks because I feel like there was an inflection point that stood out to me in both your talks. And it was kind of like a question that drives an artistic practice, but there was a moment in both conversations where you have looked at your own backyards for inspiration. And I would like you to tell me a little bit more about this. And was it like chance? Was it just like, oh, I'm here and this is accessible? Or was there an urgency or a need? Would you urge us to explore kind of the same kind of let's look really around this, even though it might seem uninteresting? Yeah.
Well, I was surprised when I received the topic of the festival. There was something I got a text that was it was referring to bewilderment, and then making that link from the bewilderment to the wilding, rewilding, and so forth. And it reminded me of the moment I was having a conversation with an advisor from the Biodiversity Center in Leiden, where they were referring to birds in the city as wild animals. And I had never made that leap because earlier there was this map that was being shown in the first presentation where you saw in the ancient worlds these exchanges, and there was this reference to wild animals originating in Africa, and there was a symbol of the lion. And so we think about these wild animals as something
like exotic,
far away and exotic. And instead, like every morning, I'm waking up by seagulls, outside my window, and those are wild animal. And then sort of like and paying attention to these seagulls can be a form of confronting on a daily basis without having to take a trip to a faraway place.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
it's working. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to listen and reflect on the question at the same time, which is not easy to do. But I guess for me, it's like ingrained in me. I think somehow, I don't know why, but I never really understood the nature-culture divide. Even from a very young age, it just didn't make sense to me. And I was like, already in a very young age, I think outside was the place where I felt best and safest. So I would go out into the park and hide in the bushes and build my, little thing there and just sit there with a book for the rest of the day. Yeah. And I was like a WF Power Ranger. That was also at that same time, by the way. Like a ranger would go past and raise money and stuff like that. So in part, I think it's always been with me. But then, of course, as I've tried to explain in my talk, there was also like a very big shift because through the work, of course, you engage with academic material, you engage in conversations, and you learn. And you also learn about your own constructs and how you've been raised to think and handle. And for me, there's always been like a lot of tension there because I felt like I couldn't really resonate with that. But at the same time, it's also my system. So I had to really challenge that for myself and possibly like invest more in the parts that felt, fluent to me. Like more, I don't want to say natural because I don't really like that word, but that felt like... that it made sense for me, I don't know how to explain it better. But yeah.
No, I think there's really a perspective shift, a little bit of like, I am also not disembodied from the way I explore wildness, but then there's also an underlying understanding of wildness as an industrial process of like, it is things are not wild at all. It's not there, and we have to like really, I don't know, plant trees or invite species back. But I think what I got from your talks is that there are things around us already wild, even in cityscapes and concrete jungles. And I remember there was a Dutch movie. It was like the Wild City, the Wildstad, and there was also kind of this invitation of like if you just look around. But then this pegs another question of there is artistic expression of like there's materials and that we need to animate these materials, but at the same time there's like ecological emergency. And how do you negotiate between like this is my artistic license to put myself into and relate and to educate almost, or to highlight the decaying ecology and to really show urgency?
Yeah, no, for me, it's I confront myself every day, because my whole practice, but not just my practice, like my life is about building relationships and going outside and staying with the trouble and confronting myself with that. And I mean, I talked a lot about grief in this talk, and I think it's important to note, because it can be such an immobilizing thing, you know, where the grief is so overwhelming that if you dive into these topics and the loss, even though there are small pockets of hope and things where, you know, other species may be flourishing because of what we're doing. But yeah, I think it's a very valid question that I try to answer, and I don't really have an answer to it. I just practice every day, invest in these relations, and also, you know, for my capabilities, which is I'm an artist, that's who I am, I can't change that. Try to somehow develop methods that give agency, or like to give a way for us to engage in a different way, you know, without, you know, getting into scientific fact or numbers, or to build relationships, you know, to facilitate that connection somehow.
Yeah, which
That's
also kind of not being scared of the emotions you feel towards, because I really love the fact that you brought grief also speaks a lot, and it connected to separate geographical contexts that seem separate, right? And you say, oh, I also have the same sense of grief in the river, and it became like a full circle. But Matteo, how would you kind of relate?
Well, I was thinking about sort of also I'm always uncomfortable with dualisms, and when I grew up and spent a lot of my youth in Florence in Italy, and we had a lot of olive trees and frescoes and things like that, and technology was something like digital technology was something quite foreign that was coming from abroad.
Yeah.
And so in 2011, I think I organized this exhibition, which was titled "Taming Technology," where I actually posited that these technologies were actually wild, and sort of for us out of control, and it's scary. So then actually I moved to the Netherlands, and suddenly I was on the other side. Okay, this is the country with all this tech industry, and technology becomes familiar, and now I'm familiar with it, and I make robots. But for me, that process was like to overcome that idea of this jungle of circuits, and feel safe in a certain way, but at the same time trying to familiarize it, trying to bring it to something which was more familiar, which was maybe not the jungle of a tropical environment, but a garden, traditional Italian context.
I think it's, and I think especially the part where you talked about like AI being wild. I remember like the early GPT models, for example, were mostly used for artistic practice because they were so unpredictable, they were so random, they were so silly. And I remember there was a sense of bewilderment about like, what is this going to bring out? I don't know. What can I do with it? There's a bit more I want to ask you, but I think I want to, again, focus the attention to the audience. If there's maybe, thank you. If there's maybe more questions or again, reflections, provocations. Does anyone have, because I'm happy to, So maybe wait for the mic so everybody can hear you.
Thanks for your presentation. I really enjoy it. As an artist myself, I really want to ask one question. It's about the while you're working on our project, when you go into the lab, I see you doing some lab works, but maybe not really like high-level bio lab works. For myself, I feel when I go into the lab and doing some like cell level things, and when I go deeper into that, I sometimes feel the distance between me and the project I want to work on. And sometimes I just want to pull myself back and go outside, like stay in some place like there is no one, and to feel better. But I also feel it's kind of a sound methodology or like exploration from scientific knowledge and combined with the field work. So want to like hear kind of your methods or like feeling about that.
All right, so lab work and really how do you... I feel like it's a question for both.
Yeah,
It feels, yeah, that you can start.
Yeah, so the disconnection you were talking about, I think that's an interesting point of view. I have done all kinds of lab work. At the Ecology Futures Master, we actually installed a biolab in the schools because it was the core of the curriculum there to ingrain like those scientific practices and engagement with like a bacterial level or cellular level into the artistic practice. And I think for myself, I tend to get overwhelmed with the amount of information I get from the field. So for instance, with the Rhine, there's so many stories to tell, so many voices that present themselves, some are even screaming. And it's sometimes hard for me to kind of, to make the connection in that way. So when I look at a sample that I take from the field, it allows me literally to zoom in and to have that kind of fascination for a very tiny bit of that huge ecosystem that can then maybe give me an entry point depending on what I find, because you never know what you find. Like it's always a treasure box that can maybe open up like a direction for me to work in. So it guides me really. And but I think there's a lot of different kind of artistic practices that engage with microbiology or microbiological techniques. That the way I think always the way your intention serves the process, right? So if your intention is to make a design with mycelium, your engagement is going to be completely different than from what I'm doing. If you're wanting to look for a scientific answer, it's probably the question is already in your head what you're looking for, and I can imagine that creates kind of that distance. But for me, it works the other way around. I quite openly accept what I see through the microscope and beyond.
Well, I guess how I would react to that question has to do with the way I think about the field of art science. So this interdisciplinary field where we are on one side making artwork, but at the other side we also want to do this what you call lab work, and then I'm not a scientist myself, so I would call it appropriating techniques and methods used in science for the creation of artworks, but then always navigating that balance of I want to make something which communicates and represents a certain aesthetic idea that is engaging with the senses and with audiences, and on the other side, I also want to be really learning things that we don't know yet, that nobody knows yet. And can I stay? Can I hold these two things and not drop them and not be judged like as incompetent from all of these different professionals that I will encounter who will be judging me based on their methodologies, and sort of keeping that groundedness in yourself. And I'm not going to be discouraged by this researcher that is undermining my confidence, or that critic, or so forth, and sort of finding the way to keep pushing forward on one side and the other side, and so forth.
Yeah, maybe I can still, if that's okay, if I can add to that, because it's an interesting thing that you're raising, because it's all, also in art and science, in Western discourse, we think in these binaries, right? They're opposite from each other, but I really don't think so. They're really complementary to each other, and they are in part overlapping. So they're both a form of literacy, creation, of knowledge creation. And I think if you see it in that way, then it gives you a lot more possibilities, and you don't have to be so scared to incorporate methods or to learn from each other, or it becomes much more of a unified thing. And they can have their differences. That's also fine. I mean, methodology, the methods are different, and the purposes are often also different.
Yeah.
But they can go very well together. And this kind of literacy creation, I think, is the ultimate goal for both, because scientific practice is also very much, there's so much speculation, extrapolation of data points, is understanding how knowledge is being created is foundational to understanding your position as an artistic researcher.
Yeah, I think it's like almost we can talk about rewilding disciplines, because it's again this idea is that there's a subject that exists in the wild, everything is subjective, and then when you go into a lab, everything is super controlled and separated from politics. I remember when I was a little bit starting out in the field, I was really obsessed almost with like rhythm analysis, like Lefebvre, and really understanding. Usually Lefebvre looks at rhythm analysis within cities and to inform like the social relations and like urban rhythms. And I was like, okay, this translates also to like social networks online. This translates into like machines themselves as like wild, like a server farm in the sounds that they make. And there's kind of this, and there were practices in the 1960s of people were so fascinated by like these big computer machinery, and they would just kind of listen together and as a community of like, what is this new thing in our ecosystem? And I think for me, yeah, we can think of like wilding. Of even like lab spaces. I will hand it over to the audience in a second, but I will ask you a question more about working with these like natural systems and these materials that sometimes have their own agency. Have you been can you recall maybe one moment, because I'm sure you have been, surprised by the subject of your study? Like either the frogs or the soundscapes or the shells. When was a real moment of like I'm genuinely taken back by what I've unveiled? Yeah.
Well, for me, when I'm looking at now, for example, listening to birds, or in my work looking at the creatures that I make, for me it's always a kind of mystery. What is it going to do?
Yeah.
What is it going to do now? In that sense, embracing that uncertainty and enjoying it, whether it's an artifact or a living thing, is where I'm constantly encountering what you are describing.
It's a constant state of like what is going to happen.
It's also kind of discipline that by incorporating it into my practice, and also trying to propose it to in people who experience in my work. Can this be the way we relate to our world?
I think it's really what you mentioned, also the state of bewilderment, as a constant state of like, being not surprised and not sensationalizing what you're seeing, not waiting for this big mind shift with every little bird that you see, but there is a sense of bewilderment, I think. Xandra.
Yeah, for me, it drives me. So I think it's at the core of every project, is the moment where I'm so amazed by a certain capability of an organism or a material that I think, okay, this has to be, how can I share this?
Yeah.
That's my immediate, I don't know, I think it's broad knowledge how pearls are being created, but I didn't know. So for me in this project, I was like, what? It's like the original contamination is in the center of each pearl. That's amazing. And I have that sense for, there's in every project, there's that kind of sense of...
But then this, I think, I have maybe a weird question here, because it's like you have this kind of feeling that you're like, oh, I got to tell the world about it. And what are you hoping the reactions of the audience of like, let's preserve this, let's understand it better, or just like, I have a feeling and you need to have it too. So what kind of drives you in this kind of storytelling, sharing process?
Well, before I form an opinion about something, I think I really collect so much context. And that's fed primarily through this like amazement or this capability or this agency that I discover, or that I, that shows itself through to me. And then I don't know. I think that feeling kind of overtakes me in the sense that I'm so amazed. I have such like profound respect and amazement for life, and then with that comes this kind of sense of care and sense of we have to fight for what we still have left, and fight for because we are in a very dire situation. So there's definitely this sense of urgency. Like for me, they go hand in hand. If you have this amazement, how can you something that you build such a personal connection with? How can you let that die?
Yeah.
It's this, and that's for me like it's a really big driver.
It's almost through your own story, you're trying to inspire others to like mend their own connections with the things that you want to preserve, right? And I think that's a really nice way to think about preservation, of really relating to things. Is there another question from the audience? You've all been suspiciously quiet, and I want to investigate.
Hi, thank you
Oh, yes.
for your presentations.
Can't see who's speaking.
It's me. Hi.
Oh, yes. Hello.
I have a question. I think it's more for Matteo, but Xandra, I'm curious to also hear your ideas on this. You brought up the concept, correct me if I'm wrong, this acoustic niche hypothesis, which essentially lays out that you have this sonic evolution that creates sort of compartmentalizations in frequency pools that different beings take in order to differentiate from one another. And I've come across this idea and something similar like this in the context of human intervention, how man-made constructs like traffic or planes disrupt certain ways of being for the natural world and the natural habitat in an ecosystem. And it can interrupt communication or like finding a mate or communicating danger. I'm wondering, aside from using this kind of frequency analysis for analyzing where human intervention does sort of harm, is there a way to use this as a point or maybe a framework for becoming with the nature? I mean, you have these beautiful installations where you're trying to communicate with nature or beings in that certain ecosystem, but what are we trying to communicate, really? And how does that certain specific sound in a certain specific frequency range can be utilized to something in more like an evolutionary perspective, and this idea of becoming, and rather than abstaining from nature itself?
Right. Layered question.
That's a wonderful question, and a question that I think I see that we are out of time already. So we can also continue discussing. But what is a short answer? I suppose that I'm just entering this field, and I'm trying to be cautious because there's mostly things I don't know, I'm a couple of years into the reading, and I haven't still really started I'm just started the making part, I think the communicating with nature is very controversial, and I'm trying to stay out of that realm. What I'm still looking at is this being with, so making music in a way that is not only trying to disrupt, but really also bringing the attention of the listener and then to what is happening in the environment. So utilizing music as a kind of more like a frame also. Okay, look, there's this thing you haven't paid attention to, maybe because like me, you're really into computers and AI, and you thought birds are boring. And then you put an AI frame around the birds, and then it's like, oh, the birds are much more interesting than AI. And so it is at the service of people. I don't know what birds want. I don't think they're going to tell me.
It's really storytelling. It's a different form of telling the story.
But perhaps by helping people to realize how amazing all of these life forms are outside their window, then there will be sort of this expansion of this community of care, and interspecies care can be, let's say, enhanced through this kind of practices.
I think that's perhaps a beautiful note to end on, and I think it's a lot of this work to me serves as a seed in a community garden of like, okay, you can also plant your own seed from your own framework with your own practice. And yeah, constantly reflecting of like, of course, I will not do the same. I don't have the material knowledge or the art practice, but there is a way that I can invoke the same sense of like wonder and emergence into my practice and really contribute differently to the conversation. So thank you for these seeds of inspiration and for being super generous with your work and sharing it. So thanks a lot, and a big round of applause for both Matteo and Xandra. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.